Hi everybody, my name is Kyle, and today I'm going to talk to you about the top 5 things to know about OpenSearch. So before we get going, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about me so you get to know who I am and what I'm talking about today. I am Kyle, I'm the Senior Developer Advocate for OpenSearch at AWS. Now, I like to introduce myself given a series of numbers. So first, let's look at 346. 346 is the number of days I've worked at Amazon when you're watching this particular video. 3 is the number of search engines I've worked with, including OpenSearch. 6 is the number of releases I've been with OpenSearch and its predecessor products, which we'll get to in a little bit later. And 53 is the degree north that I live in. I live in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, which is the northernmost city in Canada. And yes, it does get cold here, but it's not always cold. It's actually quite pleasant a lot of the year. I get that all the time. And 8 is the number of pounds my dog weighs. So I don't think you're going to hear him, but if you follow me on social media, you are for sure going to know about my dog. His name is Mr. Button. He's an Italian Greyhound. So that's a little about me, but you didn't come here to talk about me or hear about me. What you really wanted to hear about is OpenSearch and all the different things that come along with it. So our agenda for today is to talk about OpenSearch, how to get started with OpenSearch. We're going to do a little demo in that, how OpenSearch fits in, what's coming in OpenSearch, and how you can get involved. So let's go ahead and get started with that first question. What is OpenSearch? Now, I don't usually read off slides, but this is the kind of defined definition of what OpenSearch is. OpenSearch is a community-driven, open source search and analytics suite derived from the Apache 2.0 licensed Elasticsearch 7.10.2 and Kibana 7.10.2. Every one of those words is intentional, and we'll get to those each in its own right throughout the presentation. It consists of a search engine daemon, which is OpenSearch, a visualization and user interface, OpenSearch dashboards, and a series of functionality adding tools and plugins. So altogether, that's the OpenSearch project. So there is a little difference here. OpenSearch is the name of the search engine, but it's also the name of the project. So we'll get into that a little bit later as well. There's a lot of context here, and like I said, everything is important. So let's go ahead and take a look at the history. Now, in the beginning, there was open source Elasticsearch and Kibana, and they were developed by another company. Now, Amazon came along and they created what was called Open Distro for Elasticsearch. They had a service based on Elasticsearch, and then they needed added features that users wanted. So they created a series of open source plugins and tools, and then released those to the world as Open Distro for Elasticsearch. That happened about 2019. Now, let's fast forward a couple years, and we're going to look at what happened in January of 2021. At that point, Elasticsearch had a license change. Elasticsearch and Kibana went from being a Apache 2.0 piece of software into a proprietary licensed piece of software. So that left a lot of people without an option. A lot of people relied on the open source nature of Elasticsearch or Open Distro for Elasticsearch. So after a lot of deliberations, the decision was made to fork that open source Elasticsearch and Kibana. So the version before it changed the license. On the other hand, the tools and plugins that made up Open Distro for Elasticsearch, they were then archived as a distribution, and those tools and plugins were then integrated into the OpenSearch project packages. So that gives you OpenSearch. Now, the thing about this, we talked about open source a lot, and one of the key things to this is that it's an Apache 2.0 license. The license is key in any open source distribution. So Apache 2 is a really common one, but what it really allows you to do is give you all these things that I show on the screen. So use, modify, extend, embed, monetize, resell, make it part of your own product or service. And that's throughout the entire piece. There's not a piece where we're trying to, sell it to you or do anything like that. This is a purely open source project, and everything's Apache 2.0 license, which is incredibly important. The exception being the website, which is BSD3 license. There's different history behind that, but that's also a well-accepted open source license. So we really pride ourselves in this project and in making sure that we have a pure license that gives you all the different things that you might need to build whatever you want to with it in the terms of the licenses, and it's very clear and concise. So what is OpenSearch intended for? It has 2 primary use cases. They're on screen here: log metric and trace data. This is basically machine-generated stuff. And then enterprise search and general search. So this is more things that, for example, if you're typing a search into an e-commerce application, that would be that category. So it does 2 different things. So to understand these, let's talk a little bit about how data gets into it and out of it, and then some other ways of looking at it. So first, data going into it. So you have OpenSearch. This is the logo on screen here. And of course, one of the first things you can talk about is how agents can directly talk to OpenSearch. So these would be things that would effectively tail a log, right? So they'll take a log and get as the new lines come along, it is then put directly into OpenSearch. And that's perfectly possible to do. But a more typical way of doing this is to actually have an aggregator. And the aggregator takes the input from the agents and then does some massaging of that data and then puts it into OpenSearch. So it makes it lighter from the agent side. And of course, custom software can go along with it as well. So that's just data coming into it. It hits OpenSearch, and then what happens? That's an interesting point. So one of the key parts of OpenSearch is the authentication, authorization, encryption, and access control layer. There's a very comprehensive security layer built in. So this is usually the first stop shop as soon as anything comes into OpenSearch. The data is then processed. OpenSearch is based on indices, and to get to an index, you basically have to process the incoming data. So that would be separating it out into fields, taking those fields and making them searchable in different ways, and applying different types on top of those. So then it's indexed across shards. So OpenSearch is a distributed search engine, meaning that it does work across many different nodes, so you're not just stuck to one process. Intrinsic to OpenSearch, as well as this index management suite that's built in, and this allows you to take indices and expire them and make new indices that come up periodically based on some rules that you set up. And then the data is stored. So key here is that indexing and storage are separate operations. So that's how data tends to get in at a very high level. Let's talk about how data comes out of OpenSearch. So here we have somebody that's connecting to OpenSearch dashboards. OpenSearch dashboards is the UI visualization part of OpenSearch, and it runs separately from OpenSearch itself. So you have your OpenSearch instance connected to OpenSearch dashboards, and that's not the only way. Of course, you could have custom software that's coming in as well, or software that's written against the REST API for this. So there's lots of software that tends to work with OpenSearch. So this is how the different data is getting pulled out of it. These things are connecting to it and asking for the data. Of course, we have that same layer that we talked about before, the security layer. And then you get to the query layer. There's a number of ways to query in OpenSearch. First off, you have SQL, which is a very familiar language that a lot of us learned at various parts in our career. And of course, we support that, and it's a really convenient way to start looking at your data. We also have PPL, which is unique to OpenSearch at the moment. And this is the piped processing language, and it's very similar to using Unix pipes to find data in your indices. And then there's the well-known query DSL, and that is basically a JSON and REST-based query language that is very powerful, but also a little bit hard to kind of wrap your mind around sometimes. So those will then ask the question to the query and aggregation engine, which will then go across shards, of course, taking into account the index management rules that you set up, and then some other features that we have. So for example, a lot of things that we have here are based on things that are more advanced than just a standard query. So we have KNN, which is K nearest neighbors, and this is a way that's often used for things like finding recommendation engines and finding things that are similar. So these are all working together. But that works with the query and aggregation engine. The query aggregation engine returns the IDs. The IDs are then returning the actual data back from storage, and then it's going back into dashboards and returning your answer that you would get. There are other things that are going into this. For example, you have visualization, so you don't just get a raw answer. Maybe you get a chart or a map or something like that. We have reporting, which allows you to take that data outside of dashboards and give it to someone else, so it's a way to kind of export. And then notebooks, which is a way to create a narrative around your data. So you would create basically a story that has the tables or the visualizations alongside some kind of narrative information. Now, OpenSearch can also do things kind of in a way that isn't triggered directly by user input. These things kind of happen either based on different activity in your data or based on timers. Like everything else, we have our security layer that happens just like on every single one we've looked at today. And then we have a very interesting module called alerting, or it's actually a plugin. In this case, alerting will basically allow you to define an area where if data changes beyond the specifications that you put forward, something will occur. So in this case, it's taking that and repeatedly running something on an interval. So it's still going through that query and aggregation across the many shards in the cluster. And then it's going to look at the index management to make sure that it's looking at those across one or many indices. And if data matches it, it's going to fire off something like Slack or a webhook or email that basically allows you to say, hey, let's a human or maybe even another process take an action on this. So it's really great to see if you have something that might indicate that there's a problem that needs a human to intervene. And another kind of offshoot of alerting is anomaly detection. And this is where instead of having like a set point that you've signed up ahead of time, it uses a machine learning algorithm to actually be able to detect when something is unusual. So in that case, they would be looking for a situation where the data looks unlike the data that typically comes across. And that can then go into alerting and fire off those different pieces. Now, how do you get started with all this? I talked a little bit about how to get all these different pieces, but how do you work with it, right? The best way to look at this is to get your hands dirty. That's how I learned. OpenSearch 1.0 is out right now, and basically you can get your hands dirty in a couple ways. You can use the Docker images, Docker containers, or you can use TarGZ so you can install it in, say, a Linux system. We're right now support a couple of different architectures. We support x64 for Intel architectures, and we also support ARM. Intel works for Docker and TarGZ. ARM is only available for TarGZ, so only if you're installing it manually. OpenSearch 1.1, which is on the horizon very soon, if not by the time you're watching this, available. It will include many more options, so if you have different ways of getting it onto your systems. Now, the way I think most people learn best is to go in and experiment, and maybe you don't want to experiment on a production system. It's pretty wise. The best thing to do is to use Docker Compose. On OpenSearch.org, which is our website, there's instructions on how to do this, and I'm going to show you a little bit too. So Docker Compose, the kind of standard file, will basically launch 2 OpenSearch nodes. So you have a real cluster, and then OpenSearch dashboards, so you can actually do the visualizations in it. It includes all the plugins that are included typically in OpenSearch on both the OpenSearch and OpenSearch dashboard side. And then you can interface with it at 2 different ports on your local host, so 9200 to interface with OpenSearch, and then 5601 to interface with OpenSearch dashboards. Okay, so now it's demo time. I'm going to curl, and we're going to grab the Docker Compose file from the OpenSearch website. So we'll paste that in, and we're going to save it as docker-compose.yaml. That'll take almost no time. There we go. And now we're going to use Docker Compose up to start building all the containers and the resources that it needs to download. Of course, this is in major fast forward because you don't need to watch me download all these things. So this is an example for a local host setup, not something you typically use for production, but of course the Docker containers can be used for production in AWS as an example. And we also have TarGZs that are available for something like Linux if you want to run that directly. Okay, now we're creating the network that these different containers are going to talk to each other on. Okay, and then we're going to start all the containers here. We have 2 nodes here, one node of two nodes of OpenSearch and one node of OpenSearch dashboards. And then we're going to see some log messages coming across. These are kind of the standard startup logs that you would use to see if everything's starting up correctly. And this is also sped up, so you don't have to watch these log files come across. Okay, looks like things are started up in this. Okay, we're going to go to localhost 5601. That is the location of OpenSearch dashboards. And OpenSearch dashboards is the visualization tool. And we're connecting to the container here, so it's all localhost. I'm going to log in with admin. Admin, of course, in production environments, changed these 100%. And we've logged in. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to kind of load in some sample data. This is all built into everyone, so you can do the same thing too if you were getting started with it. So we'll add this flight sample data. So it's just some made up flights, destinations, and information about those things. You can kind of get your feet on doing this. Okay, everything's loaded. So now we're going to view the dashboard here. This dashboard's built right in. And the dashboard will allow you to kind of see what you can do. And you, of course, can build these bespoke for your own data as well. So we're going to put in a few cities here in Canada, Edmonton, where I live. And then we're going to put in Toronto. It's another big city, and Montreal. And we're going to do some querying here. So we're going to scroll down a little bit and hit apply changes. Okay, so we have updated based on that query. You can see the different information that's here, delays and cancellations, things like that. With the map view, you can kind of hover over things and see the destinations coming and going. A few different cities, that's Montreal and then Toronto. We have a selector of different origins. We have a tag cloud, different view of the maps, and the data itself. Let's go ahead and go up and see how these are interactive. So I'm going to click on Australia, and this is the destinations. So what this will do is apply additional filters that you can use to be able to kind of drive down into your data. You can see now we're going Canada to Australia, only flights there. So there's a couple of flights here, it looks like. Yeah, mouse over. Okay. Yeah, and then you can see there's none for Edmonton. That dot has disappeared because you have these additional filters. Okay, so now let's look at something different. Let's go ahead and go down to DevTools. And when we look at DevTools, this is kind of the way that OpenSearch talks. It uses the OpenSearch DSL. And we're just going to do get slash. And this is just like directly talking to the OpenSearch node, almost like a diagnostic tool. You can see we're connected to node 1. So next thing we're going to do is we're going to look at a way that we can use this autocomplete that's built right in. So I'm going to look at all the indices and don't quite know what I'm looking for. So I'm going to, you see it's auto-completing. It's, I think, cat underscore indices. And that'll just show the indices that are available in this cluster. And if you see here, I've got OpenSearch dashboard sample data flights. That's what we were looking at on that dashboard before. We can see that, and you can see all the other ones. The ones starting with dot are system files. But let's look at a different way. We'll go to Query Workbench. And Query Workbench allows you to query it with SQL and PPL as well. So I did a show tables, which is very similar to what we just did before. And you can see we have the same type of data and that same table. So let's go ahead and do a little bit more complex of a query. So we're going to select star and we'll paste our table name in, hit run. And we've got 200 entries here. Let's go ahead and try to do something a little more complex. So we're going to do where, and let's look at things from Cape Town. We'll copy and paste that up here. Okay, hit run. Nothing seems to be happening. So I must have left something out. So if I see here, I'm going to go ahead and so I need to kind of define what field I'm looking for that in. Kind of that's an embarrassing one. So origin is the field. We'll hit run and we see we've gone down to 111 flights. And those 111 flights, you can see that we've gone down significantly from there. Let's add another field. Let's look at flight number. So let's put that up there. We'll copy that in. Let's actually just type it in. And flight num equals, and no, we don't need flight number. Let's actually go ahead and grab a flight number down here. Just copy this in, paste it up here, and that should have one result. Okay, here we go. So this is just a short example of a few things you can do with OpenSearch and OpenSearch dashboards. There's lots more in the presentation to see. Okay, now that we've seen this, let's see how OpenSearch fits into your stack. So you've seen it. Let's take a look, maybe zoom out a little bit and look at some of the basics on this. For those who already understand this type of thing, it's very obvious where it is. But for a lot of people, they say, well, why do I need all this and how does it actually work? So let's take a look at a pretty simple crash course in log analytics. So in a typical system, even a very simple system, you have a lot of moving parts. So in this case, we have a pretty simple thing where we have a database that has a caching layer, application server that sits behind load balancers. And you can see in this visualization here, this is a chart that I'm showing you, there's multiple instances of these things. So you might have a database that has multiple nodes. You might have a caching layer that has multiple different nodes on the caching layer or multiple caching engines. Your app server may have multiple instances of this, and the load balancer may have multiple load balancer instances. But all you know is your users are reporting getting a HTTP 500 instead of the actual data they want to see. So how can you fix this? Well, if you were to go and try to look at the log files on every single one of these, you'd never get anything done. So that's why you install those agents that I was mentioning before. They actually sit on the individual pieces of your architecture, and they are taking those log files and then taking them and putting them in a way that can be taken to another step in the process. So all those agents are then sending information to an aggregator. The aggregator will then take the agent information and accepting lots of little requests and then putting them into lots of a big request, big dumps of data into OpenSearch. Aggregators here could be something like maybe Logstash or something like that. There's other ones out there, FluentD as an example. But these all do the same kind of function in that they're taking the data from the agents and then aggregating it into something that can be put into OpenSearch and maybe doing some extra, putting some more information into it. So that goes into OpenSearch, and then you have OpenSearch connected to OpenSearch dashboards. You have an operator, and that operator is going through and looking at OpenSearch dashboards and being able to query that data, build visualizations, put alerting together, all of these things in the effort here to make sure that they understand what's happening in a complex system. So whereas your users are getting this 500 error message that may be coming from anywhere and you don't know, you have to go in and say, what part of my architecture is this coming from? So OpenSearch and OpenSearch dashboards will allow you to get that insight into your system. And you can kind of look at this and say, well, okay, by doing different queries on this, I can then find out that there's a particular instance of, say, my caching layer that's malfunctioning, and you can do the typical thing of turning it off or back on, or provisioning more resources for that caching layer, and then the problem goes away, and you can wait for more problems to come along, and you can fix those. So that's Log Analytics in a nutshell. Let's go in and talk a little bit about how enterprise search works. Very similar thing, but quite a bit simpler. You have lots of different sources of data. You have maybe a database, documents, or external assets. And you want to provide some insight into where everything is across all of those things. So you would take all those pieces of data and then you would bring them into OpenSearch. So you would index them with OpenSearch. And then when a user goes to the website and searches for something, they're searching for tacos in this case, it is asking, that's sending to the app server. The app server is then asking OpenSearch and then can deliver the results and say, okay, we know that there's a database entry that says this, there's a document that says this, and maybe an external asset that you've already indexed that says that as well. So that's how that works. Now, because we're open source, we can talk a lot about what's happened, and transparency is really important. So what's coming up is something that I want to spend some time talking about. So the roadmap today, basically, for sure by the time you're watching this, OpenSearch 1.0 is GA, so it's production ready. At the end of August, approximately maybe early September, 1.1 will come out of OpenSearch. And this will be basically OpenSearch 1.0 on steroids. You get more platforms, more architectures, and then you have additional features to different pieces in it. So anomaly detection will get new features. Indexing pressure will be able to be revealed to the users. Cross-cluster search and alerting features. They're all being added to 1.1. 1.2 will add Windows support. We have an extension catalog that we're working on, more features for maps, and again, alerting and anomaly detection will get additional kind of incremental features. 1.3 for OpenSearch will include security analytics, ML frameworks, and an ML root cause analysis system. And it's in alerting and more features when it comes to observability, not just log analytics. And then early next year, 2022, we'll be looking at OpenSearch 2.0. OpenSearch works on this kind of Symver system, so that means that 2.0 will bring breaking changes. 1.0 through 1.3, those are basically things that should be more or less compatible with what we forked from, which is Elasticsearch 7.10.2. So the reason I can talk to you about all this is our public roadmap. We work transparently and in the public, so you can see what the project's doing if you go to the URL on the screen and take a look at that. That will be what we're doing. And this is a dynamic document. It is updated on a daily basis. So you'll know what our best guess as the team who's working on this, both inside Amazon and out, what we're doing. So this is our kind of work plan that we're working on all this. The way you read it is you read it kind of from left to right, and we get more information as we go further, or more information as you go from the left, and the further right, it's more kind of predictive. So as you go all the way off to the right side of the screen, we may not have as much granularity because we don't know how the intervening versions will go. So how do you join in and how do you contribute to this whole thing? We just absolutely love all contributions. We have a very open mindset to what contributions are. you might think of contributions to open source is all about code, and that's not something that we see is 100% true. There's so much value you can add by participating in the forums, commenting on issues, and commenting on pull requests in GitHub, working on documentation, writing blog posts, for example. These are all things that you can do that really contribute to the whole project. A little bit on the last two pieces here. Because we are an open source project, our documentation is open source. You can contribute to it. And our website is open source as well. That means that you can submit a blog post through writing a pull request. So a really great way to get your name out there, and we'll help you get to the standards we need to get to publish it on the website. If you're not sure of how to use it, we'll be there to kind of guide you along the way. I have mentioned opensearch.org quite a bit. Opensearch.org is really the key place that you need to go to. That has our event schedule. We have bi-weekly community meetings that the whole community comes together on, and you can see that on opensearch.org, and we have other events as well. Those community meetings, by the way, are all held online, so you're not bound by a particular geography. We have a very active forum, and the forum is a way that you can kind of asynchronously work with people in the community to get advice, also to provide feedback, and just kind of understand who else is using OpenSearch. We have, of course, our downloads. So this is where you go and find the different pieces that you would need. We have links to our documentation, and that's available online as well. And we want to make sure that we have the best documentation possible. So if you find an error, you report it, and we'd love you forever on that. We have our blog. Like I said, you can write your own piece for that. We try to provide a very technical blog that is directly towards our users. And then we have links to our GitHub repositories. The OpenSearch project has over 20 repositories in this. Those repositories include anything from meta repositories to the actual source code for the whole project that you can contribute to and look at. So I want to spend a couple minutes just talking about some training and certification courses that are available. You can find the web address here. This is a great way to level up on so much stuff that you'll hear about at the summit today. I'm not sure OpenSearch is in these just yet, but for sure that's something that content is being worked on for. And as you look at this, OpenSearch is available right now as an open source product, and it will be available as a service on AWS very soon, if not by the time you watch this, and it'll be Amazon OpenSearch service. And basically, this is the replacement for our successor to Amazon Elasticsearch service. So there'll be lots of training and certification materials on that as time comes along. So thank you so much for your time. Please connect with me on these social media platforms, or send me an email about OpenSearch or anything, maybe about my dog. I'd love to hear from you either way. So thanks so much for your time.